Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our today's session is yet a continuation on the novel Tess of the Doable. In today's session, we would do an analysis of the text of phase 5 that is titled as The Woman Pays. Before I move forward, I would just like to share a quick review of the previous session. As far as the previous session is concerned, it was based on phase 4, the consequence. We started the phase that is titled as the consequence. We covered chapters 25 to 34 and finished phase 4 thus. In doing so, we covered the following aspects. We explored the text of these chapters, we explored related themes. We also discussed the development of characters. We actually looked at the development of the characters of Angel and Tess in relation to each other. In other words, we saw how their relationship established. We critically analyzed the selected parts of text. Especially, we critically analyzed some text parts with relation to the conflict that was going on in the mind of Tess and how she was in a fix whether to tell the truth to her lover Angel or not. And towards the end of the chapter, we saw that finally, after facing conflict for such a long time, it is only after their marriage that Tess finds herself in a situation or in a position where she can tell the truth regarding her relationship with Alec and then the birth of her child, illegitimate child, Sorrow. And she tells all these details to Angel. Well, as far as today's session is concerned, we will start phase 5 that is titled as The Woman Pays. Well, I would say that the title of the phase, that is The Woman Pays, itself it conveys a lot to the reader. As readers, we can completely understand and we can apprehend what is going to happen and what would be probably the reaction of Angel to the confession that is made by Tess. Anyhow, in this phase, we will cover chapters 35 to 44 and thus we would finish this phase. So the first chapter of phase 5, that is in total chapter 35 of the novel. And here we begin. The whole chapter is about Angel's reaction to Tess's confession. Angel is disturbed by the confession that Tess makes. He begs her to deny it, but she cannot. He leaves the house and Tess follows after him. For hours they walk the grounds of the mansion. Tess tells her husband that she will do anything he asks and even offers to drown herself. Angel orders her to go back to the house where when he returns, Tess is asleep. Angel also goes to sleep in a different room. Let us look at some text. Hardy starts the chapter and the phase with giving a kind of change in the environment. Her narrative ended. Even its reassertions and secondary explanations were done. Tess's voice throughout had hardly risen higher than its opening tone. There had been no exculpatory phrase of any kind and she had not wept. But the complexion even of external things seemed to suffer transmission as her announcement progressed. The fire in the grate looked impish, demonically funny, as if it did not care in the least about her strait. The fender grinned idly, as if it too did not care. The light from the water bottle was merely engaged in a chromatic problem. All material objects around announced their irresponsibility with terrible iteration, and yet nothing had changed since the moments when he had been kissing her, or rather nothing in the substance of things, but the essence of things had changed. When she ceased, the auricular impressions from their previous endearments seemed to hustle away into the corner of their brains. repeating themselves as echoes from a time of supremely purblind foolishness. Claire performed the irrelevant act of stirring the fire. The intelligence had not yet even got to the bottom of him. After stirring the embers, he rose to his feet. All the force of her disclosure had imparted itself now. His face had withered. In the sternness of his concentration, he treadled fitfully on the floor. He couldn't by any contrivance think closely enough. That was the meaning of his vague movement. When he spoke, it was in the most inadequate, commonplace voice of the many varied tones she had heard from him. Tess, yes, dearest. Am I to believe this? From your manner, I am to take it as true. Oh, you cannot be out of your mind. You ought to be. Yet you are not. My wife, my Tess. Nothing in your warrants such a supposition as that. I am not out of my mind, she said. And yet he looked vacantly at her to resume with dazed senses. Why didn't you tell me before? Ah, yes, you would have told me in a way, but I hindered you, I remember. These and other of his words were nothing but the perfunctory babble of the surface while the depths remained paralyzed. He turned away and bent over a chair. Tess followed him to the middle of the room where he stood there staring at him with eyes that did not weep. Presently she slid down upon her knees beside his foot, and from this position she crouched in a heap. In the name of our love, forgive me, she whispered with a dry mouth. I have forgiven you for the same. And as he did not answer, she said again, Yes, yes, you do, but you do not forgive me. Oh, Tess, forgiveness does not apply to the case. You were one person, now you are another. My God, how can forgiveness meet such a grotesque prestigiation as that? He paused, contemplating this definition, then suddenly broke into horrible laughter, as unnatural and ghastly as a laugh in hell. Don't, it kills me quite, that, she shrieked. Oh, have mercy upon me, have mercy. He didn't answer, and sickly white, she jumped up. Angel, what do you mean by that laugh? She cried out. Do you know what this is to me? He shook his head. I've been hoping, longing, praying to make you happy. I've thought what joy it will be to do it. What an unworthy wife I shall be if I don't. That's what I have felt, Angel. I know that. I thought, Angel, that you loved me, my very self. If it is I you do love, oh, how can it be that you look and speak so? It frightens me. Having begun to love you, I love you forever, in all changes, in all disgraces, because you are yourself. I ask no more. Then how can you, oh my own husband, stop loving me? I repeat, the woman I have been loving is not you. But who? Another woman in your shape. So look at the response of Angel. Whereas for the same thing, Tess has forgiven Angel. Angel is not ready to forgive Tess for this, and the pretense that and the reason that actually he gives for that is that the woman he loved was a pure woman, and the woman now stands in front of him is an impure woman, and this is not a case of forgiveness. Rather, what he feels is that it was another woman in the shape, as he said, of Tess that he actually loved, and now he doesn't feel any emotion or feeling for Tess as she stands there and begs for forgiveness. When it comes to the discussion points related to this chapter, there are some important themes: theme of guilt, theme of forgiveness, and of course the theme of permanence of sin. We will discuss these themes one by one. As far as the theme of guilt is concerned, Tess at this time point is over with the most of the part of the guilt, because ultimately, finally she has confessed, she has told the truth to Angel. However, when it comes to forgiveness, we find that that Tess has a far bigger heart than Angel, and she, without even Angel asking her for her forgiveness, she is there, and she declares that she forgives him. However, when it comes to Angel, and he is rather asked by, he is rather requested by, pleaded by Tess to forgive her, what we notice is that he is not ready to do so, and he has excuses for that. This leads us to the theme of permanence of sin as well. What we have noticed is that whatsoever happened to Tess, irrespective of the view whether she sinned or she was sinned against, we see that the blobs of that sin, the marks of that sin are so very permanent that the efforts that Tess makes to remove them are not successful, and they follow her throughout her life in the coming years. We also need to notice the contrast of behaviors between the two, that Tess forgives him, but he does not forgive Tess for the same thing. This becomes a harsh criticism on the society as well, where men are forgiven by women for all these moral weaknesses, and they expect to be forgiven as well, whereas when it comes to women, men are not ready for that. The intellectual character of the love that Angel feels for Tess becomes apparent in Angel's reaction. He speaks calmly and rationally rather than resorting to a burst of anger at the news. His behavior is cold and clinical, and his words cautious and precise. This contrasts sharply with the emotions of Tess and with her emotional behavior, as she was that she would die for Angel if he were to demand so. This lends a particularly chilling quality to Angel's newfound contempt for Tess. He grounds his objections to Tess in such solid and inarguable ground as when he contrasts her current self-sacrifice with past self-preservation, that he leaves no room for his own personal flexibility. Angel's principles doom him to forsake the woman that he previously loved. This brings us to chapter 36 of the novel and the second chapter of this phase. Angel arises at dawn. The neighboring cottager's wife knocks on the door, but he sends her away because her presence is awkward, as he feels. Angel prepares breakfast, and the two behave civilly to one another, although each of them is in a wretched condition. 3 miserable days go by, during which Angel spends his time at the mill or with his studies. Tess continues to do chores around the house for Angel. He scolds her for behaving as a servant and not a wife. Tess breaks into tears, saying that she had told him that she was not respectable enough to marry him, but he urged her. We as readers notice that Angel Clare's love for Tess is very impractical and ideal, and he does not look at the reality. His idealism blocks his acceptance of Tess as it blocked his acceptance of the church. Because in the case of church also, we noticed that he had a very, very idealized view of church. Since Tess considers herself responsible for it, she asks Angel to divorce her in order to get rid of her. Finally, Tess also offers to go home, and Angel also tells her that he wants her to go home. Here is some related text from this chapter. The pair were in truth but the ashes of their former fires. To the hot sorrow of the previous night had succeeded heaviness. It seemed as if nothing could kindle either of them to fervor of sensation any more. He spoke gently to her, and she replied with a like undemonstrativeness. At last she came up to him, looking in his sharply defined face as one who had no consciousness that her own formed a visible object also. Angel, she said, and paused, touching him with her fingers lightly as a breeze, as though she could hardly believe to be there in the flesh the man who was once her lover. Her eyes were bright, her pale cheek still showed its wonted roundness, though half-dried tears had left glistening traces thereon, and the usually ripe red mouth was almost as pale as her cheek. Throbbingly alive as she was still under the stress of her mental grief, the life beat so brokenly that a little further pull upon it would cause real illness, dull her characteristic eyes, and make her mouth thin. She looked absolutely pure. Now again it becomes ironic. Now that she has disclosed all what we would call her impurity, she looks absolutely pure as she is painted here with the masterly pen that Hardy has. Nature in her frantic trickery had set such a seal of maidenhood upon Tess's countenance that he gazed at her with a stupefied air. Tess, say it is not true. No, it is not true. It is true. Every word, every word. He looked at her imploringly, as if he would willingly have taken a lie from her lips, knowing it to be one, and have made of it, by some sort of sophistry, a valid denial. However, she only repeated, "It is true." "Is he living?" Angel then asked. "The baby died." "But the man?" "He's alive," she responded. A last despair passed over Claire's face. "Is he in England?" "Yes." He took a few vague steps. "My position in this," he said abruptly, any man would have thought, that by giving up all ambition to win a wife with social standing, with fortune, with knowledge of the world, I should secure rustic innocence as surely as should secure pink cheeks. But, however, I am no man to reproach you, and I will not." We notice, by the way, a streak of snobbery as he says all this. The text continues anyhow. Tess felt his position so entirely that the remainder had not been needed. Therein lay just the distress of it. She saw that he had lost all around. "Angel, I should not have let it go on the marriage with you if I had not known that after all there was a last way out of it for you, though I hoped you would never." Her voice grew husky. "A last way?" he asked. "I mean, to get rid of me. You can get rid of me." "How?" "By divorcing me." "Good heavens, how can you be so simple? How can I divorce you?" "Can't you? Now I have told you. I thought my confession would give you grounds for that." "Oh, Tess, you are too childish, unformed, crude, I suppose. I don't know what you are. You don't understand the law. You don't understand what you cannot." "Indeed I cannot." A quick shame mixed with the misery upon his listener's face. I thought, she whispered. "Oh, now I see how wicked I seem to you. Believe me, oh my soul." So, as we look at this text, what we notice about Tess is that she feels guilty for creating this pain and this trouble for Angel. She not only feels guilty, she also feels herself responsible for the current state of situation, and what she asks Angel is that she would be okay with it if he divorces her, and the response of Angel is by calling her crude and childish, he says that she even doesn't know the law. And this is for the first time that Tess realizes that actually Angel is put into a situation where he can neither get rid of Tess according to the Christian law, nor he can be a happy man as he was before. When it comes to looking at this chapter from a critical perspective, I would say this chapter presents Angel's response to Tess's sin. It also focuses on Angel's principles and the effects that they have on his marriage to Tess. As earlier established, it is the idealistic perception that he has of Tess that blocks his acceptance of her, and I have already pointed out that he had the same idealized views about church, and the same idealism made him reject the church and made him decide not to join church as a clergyman. He thinks of her either as a wholehearted saint or sinner. Before this confession, she was all pure, the most pure, a symbol of virginity, a symbol of beauty, and a sign of angelic innocence. But now at this stage she is completely a sinner. Again, both extreme ideal views we would see in contrast here. We will also notice that by remaining tied to his principles of morality, Angel acts far less decently towards Tess than he would have dealt with her in a way if he were to be more subject to his passions. This leads us to chapter 37. In chapter 37, what we notice is that this is a midnight scene, and at midnight, Angel enters the bedroom to find Tess asleep. Claire comes close and bends over her. Dead, 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 he murmurs. He then carries Tess in his arms and rolls her in the sheet as in a shroud, and his sleepwalk in that he lifts her from the bed and carries her across the room, leaning her against the banister as if to throw her down, but rather kisses her and goes downstairs. Tess realizes that he is dreaming about the Sunday when he carried her across the water with other maids. He carried her near the river. Tess is afraid that he would drown her. In his sleep, he walks through the shallow water of the river carrying her, but they reach the other side safely. If she had awakened him, they would have fallen into the gulf and both died, so she does not awake him. Angel carries her to an empty stone coffin where he lays Tess and then falls down asleep. We find poor Tess sitting up in the coffin, but she does not wake Angel out of her fear that he may die if awakened from sleepwalking. She very carefully walks him back to the house. Next morning, Tess realizes that he doesn't even remember what happened last night, and as they travel to Maralt, they take a brief stop at the dairy to meet the people at the dairy. We notice as readers that when Tess and Angel leave, Mrs. Crick remarks how unnatural the two look, as if they were in a dream. Anyhow, Angel leaves Tess near her village and departs. He tells Tess that he has no anger over her and he will let her know where he is going as soon as he himself knows. He also tells her that until he comes to her, she should not come to him, and that she should write if she is ill or if she wants anything. Having said all this, Angel leaves. Critically looking at this chapter, we find the following important points that are of crucial importance to the understanding of the chapter. Sleepwalk of Angel shows how much he is psychologically disturbed by Tess's revelation. He so fervently believes that his wife is dead that he carries her to a coffin and lays her there. Well, this is a departure from previous chapters in which Hardy has portrayed Angel as coldly observing his principles without any display of affection or love or care for his wife. Here, the unconscious Angel shows that he still loves the previous conception he had of Tess, yet cannot reconcile it with the new information about her or the reality that is revealed by her. Some important things with relevance to the theme of self-sacrifice we notice in the character of Tess. Tess is once again ready for any sacrifice. From the very beginning, what we have noticed is she has been sacrificing for others. She sacrificed for the first time for the family. She suffered a lot as a result of that. She was ready to make any sacrifice for her son, Sorrow. She is ready now to make any kind of sacrifice for Angel. Despite the threat to her life, she does not wake Angel up as he takes her through water in his sleepwalk. She is ready to serve as a mere servant, not demanding her position or status as a wife. She is ready to die, she is ready to be killed. She is ready for separation, she allows him to divorce her. Any kind of self-sacrifice that she thinks would lessen the pain of Angel, she is ready for that. Thus, chapter 37 leads to chapter 38. And what we see in chapter 38 is that Tess returns home very sad. She attempts to arrive at home unobserved but cannot. She sees a girl whom she knew from school and claims that her husband is now away at business. It is a very, very ironic situation. Let us look at a small part of text that is highlighted here in blue on the slide. At sight of her father's chimney, she asked herself how she could possibly enter the house. Inside that cottage, her relations were calmly supposing her far away on a wedding tour with a comparatively rich man who was to conduct her to bouncing prosperity, while here she was, friendless, creeping up to the old door, quite by herself with no better place to go to in the world. She confesses to her mother that she has told the truth to Angel. Of course, Mrs. Derbyfield is very, very angry at this. She rebukes her for this and calls her a fool. On the other hand, her father, Mr. Derbyfield, finds it hard to believe that Tess is even married. He doesn't know, by the way, the rest of the story. Tess is miserable at home. She receives a letter from Angel informing her that he has begun looking for a farm in the north. Tess uses this as an excuse to leave her parents' place by saying that she wants to join her husband. अब वो घर वालों से झूठ बोल के कि वो अपने हस्बैंड के पास जा रही है. Actually, she wants to leave this place. Before she leaves, she gives half of the 50 pounds Angel has given her to her mother. Again, her sense of responsibility and her loyalty towards her family can be noticed, that the small amount of money that she has, the only 50 pounds that she has that are given by Angel for her survival, half of that she gives to her mother for the family. Looking at the chapter critically, I would say Tess returns to her parents for the second time being humiliated. We noticed at the end of phase 1, her first return was set, and in the second phase we saw that return taking place and the consequences of that return that were full of humiliation for her. Again, what we notice is she is back to her parents with the same sense of humiliation. It is the theme of sin that overpowers in this chapter. Here the mother of Tess, Joan, becomes a mouthpiece of Hardy to remind Tess that she committed a sin by marrying Angel without telling him about Alec. Another important aspect is the use of Tess as a pawn. Both her parents focus completely on the effect that Tess's marriage has on them. They just take her as a puppet and they like to move her strings. This reminds us of how they manipulated Tess when they sent her to claim kinship with the D'Urbervilles. So to them, Tess is only a pawn, she is just a puppet. They move her, they change her position, they move her strings for their own benefits. This leads us to chapter 39 of the novel, and what we notice in this chapter is that 3 weeks after their marriage, Angel visits his parents. He informs them that he is traveling to Brazil and not taking Tess along. His parents are alarmed and disappointed, but Angel tells them that they will meet Tess in a year when he returns. Angel tells his parents that he has decided to go to Brazil. They regret that they could not have met the wife of Angel and that they did not attend the wedding. Mrs. Clare questions Angel about Tess, asking if he was her first love and if she is pure and virtuous without question. He answers that she is. This response of Angel is very important. No matter whatsoever he feels about her, he still does not spoil her reputation in front of his parents, and the reputation that he creates of Tess is again of respect. Angel's parents surprise him by reading a biblical passage about how virtuous wives are loving, loyal, selfless and working. It is ironic that Mrs. Clare applies the passage directly to Tess, talking about her wholehearted acceptance of Angel's choice not to marry a fine lady. As Angel is disturbed by all this, he leaves the room. Thus Mrs. Clare guesses that Angel has discovered something dishonorable about Tess's past. However, it is interesting that Angel denies this claim of his mother, and in a way he safeguards the respect of and the reputation of Tess in the eyes of his mother. Here are some important discussion points with reference to this chapter. It is of great importance for us as readers that Angel admits that he may have treated Tess harshly, but at this point he does nothing to make repairs for what he has done. Rather, he admits his own faults without yet taking steps to amend what he has done. However, his guilt over his treatment of Tess builds throughout this chapter. This leads us to chapter 40 of the novel. Angel discusses his Brazil plans with his parents at breakfast. Then he goes to bank to put the jewelry in the bank. He arranges to have some additional money sent to Tess, then travels to the Wellbridge farm to finish some business there. He wonders whether he has been cruelly blinded and believes that if she had told him sooner, he would have forgiven her. At the farm, he encounters Iz and invites her to go to Brazil with him. Iz agrees and says that she loves him. He asks if she loves him more than Tess, and Iz replies that no one could love him as much as Tess did. Well, here are two important points to notice. One, the conflict going on in the mind of Angel. He now thinks that he would have forgiven Tess if she would have told it to him before. On the other hand, when he reaches the farm and he meets Iz there, he invites her to go to Brazil with him. This is very ironic that the idea of taking Iz with him, it actually shows that how actually his idealism doesn't allow him to forgive Tess. When, however, he asks Iz whether she loves him more than Tess, she interestingly and very truthfully tells him that Tess loves him far more than anybody else. Finally, Angel claims that he does not know what he has been saying and apologizes for his momentary levity. He tells us that she has saved him by her honest words about Tess from an impulse toward folly, and sadly he takes Iz to her home and leaves for Brazil alone a few days later. This leads us to chapter 41. Again, some time lapse is shown. It has been 8 months that Tess and Angel parted. Tess keeps on working at different dairies near Port Brady to the west of Blackmore Valley. She somehow manages to hide from her family that she is separated from her husband. When she runs short of money, she has to use the money Angel left for her, and her parents write her asking for money to help repair the cottage roof. The reality that she is no more living with Angel is yet, you see, not revealed to her parents, so they think that she would be in a position to give some financial assistance. So in this context, she sends them nearly everything she has. Again, the theme of self-sacrifice, the theme of responsibility and loyalty towards her family comes in. Though she is short on money, she is too ashamed to ask the Clares, the family of Angel Clare, for money. Meanwhile, Angel lies ill from fever in Brazil, having been drenched with thunderstorms and affected other hardships. Life is equally unpleasant and full of hardships for Angel when he is in Brazil, though the nature of hardships is different. Tess now journeys to an upland farm to which she had been recommended by Marion, who learned of her separation through Iz. Though it is a tough land to travel to, but she decides to do so because she badly needs a job. On her journey, she meets a man whom Angel confronted for addressing Tess coarsely. He tells Tess that she should apologize for allowing Angel to inappropriately defend her honor, but Tess cannot answer him. Tess instead runs away, where she hides in a forested area. She hides there for quite a long time until it is morning. There she finds dying birds around her and helps by relieving them from the pain of life. Well, with reference to this chapter, here in the blue color I have shown some parts of the text that are critically important for the understanding of what goes on. And then at the bottom of the slide I have given some details regarding the theme of death and death as a source of end to suffering. Starting with the text. With the impulse of a soul who could feel for kindred sufferers as much as for herself, Tess's first thought was to put the still living birds out of their torture. And to this end, with her own hands, she broke the necks of as many as she could find, leaving them to lie where she had found them till the gamekeepers should come, as they probably would come, to look for them a second time. So now where in the forest she is hiding, she finds a lot of birds that are shot by the gamekeepers, who want to kill these birds for their own game's sake. And these injured birds are in a very, very miserable condition, and Tess releases them from the pain of life by breaking their necks and by killing them. Poor darlings, to suppose myself the most miserable being on earth in the sight of such mercy as yours, she exclaimed, her tears running down as she killed the birds tenderly. And not a twinge of bodily pain about me. I be not mangled, and I be not bleeding, and I have 2 hands to feed and clothe me. So she compares herself with them. She was ashamed of herself for her gloom of the night, based on nothing more tangible than a sense of condemnation under an arbitrary law of society which had no foundation in nature. And commenting upon this text, especially the last couple of lines, I would say Hardy's criticism on the laws of society versus the laws of nature, where he looks at the laws of society in a complete opposition to the laws of nature. As far as the theme of death as an end to suffering is concerned, when Tess kills the dying birds that were shot by the hunting party, she demonstrates her compassion and sympathy with the afflicted. She demonstrates mercy by sparing the animal's pain. Although a direct analogy between Tess and the wounded birds is a drastic oversimplification, this event nevertheless introduces the idea of death as a compassionate end to suffering, and thus appropriately frames and foreshadows the inevitable end to Tess. And we as keen readers start apprehending what kind of end Tess would meet. With this we come to chapter 42. Tess starts again alone toward Chalk Newton, where she had breakfast at an inn. At this inn there are several young men who give comments and compliments to Tess on her beauty. Tess takes to making herself ugly to protect herself from lustful men. She covers her chin and cuts off her eyebrows, and she also dresses in old, unattractive clothing. When Tess reaches the farm near the village of Flintcombe Ash, Marion is curious about Angel, but Tess asks her not to inquire about him. The place is barren and rough. Hardy's use of imagery complements the poor condition of Tess. The owner of the farm agrees to give Tess a job, and Tess sends her new address to her parents. Without much development in the plot, this chapter gives way to the next chapter. However, here is some text from this chapter that shows how Tess feels. Marion was quite respectful in her inquiries, but seemed much moved by the fact that Tess should still continue in no better condition than at first, though she had dimly heard of the separation. Tess, Mrs. Clare's, the dear wife of dear he, and is it really so bad as this, my child? Why is your lovely face tied up in such a way? Anybody been beating ye? Nutty? No, I merely did it not to be clipsed or cold, Marion. So they are talking about the relationship between Tess and Angel. She pulled off in disgust a bandage which could suggest such wild thoughts. Actually, she, as I have already told, Tess has covered her face in order to hide her beauty. And you've got no collar on. Tess had been accustomed to wear a little white collar at the dairy. I know it, Marion, you've lost it travelling. I've not lost it. The truth is, I don't care anything about my looks, and so I didn't put it on. When she says, I don't care anything about my looks, it shows how much the suffering her beauty has brought to her. And she is no more interested in looking beautiful. And you don't wear your wedding ring. So Marion is quite keen to notice everything, I would say. Yes, I do, but not in public. I wear it round my neck on a ribbon. I don't wish people to think who I am by marriage, or that I am married at all. It would be so awkward while I lead my present life. So she is wearing the ring but on a ribbon round her neck that is concealed from the eyes of public. This brings us to chapter 43, and what we notice in chapter 43 is Tess sets to work at Flintcomb Ash, sustained by her sense of patience. Marion now has alcohol as her only comfort. She suggests that they should invite Is, Hewitt and Retty. Marion soon hears from Is that she is coming. The winter is particularly harsh, so that one particular day practically it becomes impossible to work because of the harsh weather conditions. Marion tells Tess that the harsh weather improves Tess's beauty and that her husband should see her now. Tess asks her not to mention him. Here I would like to point out two important things. One, the background scenery, the geographical settings. When it comes to nature, that is almost a second character, as I said earlier in the introduction of the novel. When you see the role of nature, you would see when Tess is happy, the background is shown to be pleasant, green, lush, beautiful, birds chirping, fragrant air, etc. And when Tess is in a sad mood, you would see grey, dull background, grim background. Now that Tess is passing through a phase of her life that is a very tough phase, what we notice is the background where she works at Flintcomb Ash is a background that is full of discomfort. That is a background where weather is very harsh. So Hardy keeps on changing the backdrop scenes taken from nature to support what he presents in terms of changes in the life of Tess. The second important thing that I would like you to notice is the comment of Marion, who tells Tess that harsh weather improves Tess's beauty. So Tess's beauty really is not about her beautiful face or her physical beauty. It is the beauty of her personality that is a product of, or that is matured through, the harsh conditions of her life. When Marion anyhow asserts that Angel should not have left her, we notice that Tess still defends Angel. Look at the text. He was a very splendid lover, no doubt, she said, but I do not think it is a too fond husband to go away from you so soon. He had to go, Tess is trying to defend. He was obliged to go to see about the land over there, pleaded Tess. He might have tided over the winter. Ah, that's owing to an accident, a misunderstanding, and we won't argue it, Tess answered, with tearfulness in her words. Perhaps there's a good deal to be said for him. He did not go away, like some husbands, without telling me, and I can always find out where he is. So what we notice about Tess is that she still loves Angel, and as she claimed, irrespective of anything that happens to him or that he does, once now that she loves him, she would love him always for his own sake, for whatsoever he is. And this is what is proved here at this point. Anyhow, the chapter continues. To much distress, Tess finds that her employer is the Trantridge native from whom she had taken flight, remember, hiding there in the forest. The man enjoys the fact that he has regained his superior position, and of course he would not let go any situation where he would tease or disgrace Tess. Tess does not answer him, so he demands an apology from her. Tess continues to work, but she finally sinks down upon a heap of wheat ears at her feet because all her energy is drained. Marion cries out that the work requires harder flesh than hers. The farmer suddenly enters and reprimands her for not working. We see Is and Marion as true good friends who continue working to make up for Tess after the farmer leaves. वो उसके हिस्से का भी काम करती हैं वहाँ पर. Tess also comes to know from Marion. Angel asked Is to accompany him to Brazil, but changed his mind later on. When she comes to know this, she cries at this news, thinking that she has been wrong and neglectful. Again, what we notice is Tess keeps on blaming herself for everything, Again, what we notice here about her is, instead of blaming Angel for what he did, she blames herself for that. She also tries to write a letter to him, and let us read some relevant text in this regard. Well, dear students, this is the closing text of chapter 43. Well, yes, is said. Don't you tell her, but I am sure I can't help it. It was what he wanted is to do. He wanted her to go off to Brazil with him. So Marion is revealing the truth regarding Angel's invitation to Is to go along. Tess's face faded, as white as the scene without, and its curves straightened. And did he refuse to go? She asked. I don't know. Anyhow, he changed his mind. Oh, then he didn't mean it. It was just a man's jest. Again, what you would notice is she's defending him. Yes, he did, for he drove her a good ways towards the station. He didn't take her. They pulled on in silence till Tess, without any premonitory symptoms, burst out crying. There, said Marion, how I wish I hadn't told ye. No, it is a very good thing that you have done. I've been living on in a third-over, lack-a-day way, and have not seen what it may lead to. I ought to have sent him a letter oftener. Again, she's blaming herself. He said I couldn't go to him, but he didn't say I was not to write as often as I liked. I won't delay like this any longer. I have been very wrong and neglectful in leaving everything to be done by him. The dim light in the barn grew dimmer, and they could see to work no longer. When Tess had reached home that evening and had entered into the privacy of her little whitewashed chamber, she began impatiently writing a letter to Claire. But, falling into doubt, she could not finish it. Afterwards, she took the ring from the ribbon on which she wore it next her heart and retained it on her finger all night, as if to fortify herself in the sensation that she was really the wife of his elusive lover of hers, who could propose that Is should go with him abroad so shortly after he had left her. Knowing that, how could she write entreaties to him or show that she cared for him any more? When it comes to the discussion points of this chapter, I would just refer to the recurring themes of the permanence of sin and the theme of guilt. No matter how far Tess is responsible for what happened to her, she is to bear the marks of, the stains of that sin throughout her life. And the theme of guilt, as I have already said, she feels guilty and she holds herself responsible for a lot of things that maybe she should not hold herself responsible for. This brings us to chapter 44. And in chapter 44, what we see is that Tess wonders why her husband has not written to her, for he had told him that he would at least let her know of his whereabouts. She wonders whether he is indifferent or ill. To know about the circumstances of Angel, finally she decides to visit Angel's family. So, according to this decision, on a Sunday morning, the only morning in which Tess may leave, Tess leaves for Amminster to discover what has happened to him, that is to Angel, and begins to walk to the vicarage, the place where Angel's parents live. She takes off her boots and hides them, planning to put them on again for the walk home, because these are a gift from Angel, so she doesn't want them to be spoiled. When Tess reaches the home of the Clares at Amminster, nobody answers, for they are all at church. She overhears Angel's brothers discussing Angel's unfortunate marriage, and when they find her boots, they assume they belong to a peasant. Tess is ashamed and unhappy and decides not to meet Angel's family after all. Here is some part of the text. Ah, she said, still sighing in pity of herself. They didn't know that I wore those over the roughest part of the road to save these pretty ones he bought for me. No, they did not know it. And they didn't think that he chose the color of my pretty frock. No, how could they? If they had known, perhaps they wouldn't have cared. For they don't care much for him, poor thing. So Tess, who has covered the whole long distance wearing those ugly broken shoes, so that the shoes that she's carrying along, that are a beautiful pretty pair of shoes given by Angel, they are not spoiled, and when she reaches there near the house, she replaces these worn out ones with the new ones to get ready to meet the family of Angel, and hides the old ones there. They are seen and they are commented upon by the brothers of Angel as the shoes of some peasant, and this really makes her feel ashamed, and this consciousness does not allow her to meet the family of Angel, and she decides to return without meeting them. Heartbroken, she takes her journey back. So Tess leaves Amminster and reaches the village of Evershade, where she comes to know a great Christian man is preaching. Now she is on her way back. She continues her journey and comes across a barn in which a passionate sermon is being delivered. She looks inside and recognizes the preacher as Alec d'Urberville, who is delivering a sermon on justification by faith. It appears to be very ironic, the same Alec who is a source of all the unhappiness in the life of Tess. Once again she comes across him, and now that he appears on the scene, he is all changed a person. He is delivering a sermon in the role of a clergyman. He is delivering a sermon on justification by faith. That is very ironic in the whole context. Well, when it comes to important discussion points with reference to this chapter, a few things are important. Number one, continuously suffering and facing indignities. This is the fate of Tess. This reappearance of Alec d'Urberville again is very significant. It foreshadows some happenings that would be very crucial maybe, that we would come across in the upcoming chapters. As far as the irony of the situation is concerned, Angel, who is the son of a very strictly religious and moral minister, finds himself a businessman, while the unscrupulous hedonist becomes a fundamentalist preacher here in the form of Alec. It is even more ironic that his conversion is brought by Angel's own father, Reverend Clare. If you remember previously in one chapter, what we noticed was that Reverend Clare told Angel that he tried to bring a person named Alec to the right track of religion, but at that point he was not successful in that. However, doubts are raised by the amount to which Alec has changed since Tess has left Trantridge, because it is a very critical, crucial and an extreme kind of change that we notice in Alec. With this, I bring you to the closing text of chapter 44, that is also the closing text of this phase. Tess was all the more interested as she stood listening behind in finding that the preacher's doctrine was a vehement form of the view of Angel's father, and her interest intensified when the speaker began to detail his own spiritual experiences of how he had come by those views. He had, he said, been the greatest of sinners. He had scoffed, he had wantonly associated with the reckless and the lewd, but a day of awakening had come, and in a human sense it had been brought about mainly by the influence of a certain clergyman, whom he had at the first grossly insulted, but whose parting words had sunk into his heart and had remained there, till by the grace of heaven they had worked this change in him and made him what they saw him. But more startling to Tess than the doctrine had been the voice, which, impossible as it seemed, was precisely that of Alec d'Urberville. Her face fixed in painful suspense, she came round to the front of the barn and passed before it. The low winter sun beamed directly upon the great double-doored entrance on this side, one of the doors being open so that the rays stretched far in over the threshing floor to the preacher and his audience, all snugly sheltered from the northern breeze. The listeners were entirely villagers, among them being the man whom she had seen carrying the red paint pot on a farmer on a former memorable occasion. But her attention was given to the central figure, who stood upon some sacks of corn, facing the people and the door. The 3 o'clock sun shone full upon him, and the strange and awaiting conviction that her seducer confronted her, which had been gaining ground in Tess ever since she had heard his words distinctly, was at last established as a fact indeed. And at this point, Hardy announces end of phase the 5th. Before I close today's session, I would just like to give comments on the whole phase 5. These are the overall comments. Phase the 5th, the woman phase, as the title of the phase shows, and marks the suffering of Tess. In addition, the decline of Tess's physical appearance also it indicates the sharp downturn in her life. We notice that she even cuts off her eyebrows to make herself unattractive to lustful young men. In terms of plot, it is important that Tess's re-encounter with Alec is brought at a point of her greatest weakness and maximum suffering. She has gone, well, this is a typo, she has gone to ask for help from Angel's parents while grieving for the beloved man whose unyielding judgment had caused her all these later sorrows. She encounters the man who condemned her to that judgment, and the stage is set for Tess's hardest challenge: to avoid the temptation to give in to Alec d'Urberville again in order to help herself and her family. And she is again in a state of conflict. With this, we come to the end of this phase that leaves us at a point where we find Tess once again caught up in a situation where she is in her weakest of the weakest states and where she really needs a support, and the temptation again is there in the form of Alec to save herself and to save her family on the financial grounds. How far she would take in the help of Alec, how far she would give in, this is yet to be seen, that we would look at in the upcoming chapters. With this, we come to the closing of today's session. This is the summary of today's session. We started phase 5 and we completed the phase that is titled as the woman phase. We have covered chapters 35 to 44 and have finished this phase. Inshallah ta'ala, in the next phase, what we would do is we would look at yet another phase of the life of Tess and would see how the story moves forward. Till this point, I would say Allah Hafiz. Thank you very much.